I have been on the bench long enough to know that laughter can mean many things in a courtroom. Sometimes it is nerves, sometimes it is disbelief, sometimes it is the thin, foolish sound people make when they still think consequences are negotiable. The morning Tyler Holloway stood in front of me, his laughter was the third kind. He was 19 years old, well-dressed, well-groomed, and carrying himself with the particular confidence of a young man who had spent too much of life being told that mistakes are temporary and reputations are permanent. The trouble with that lesson is that it works beautifully until the first day it does not. The charges were not cinematic. They were not the sort that make national news on their own. Reckless driving in a pedestrian-heavy loading zone, disorderly conduct, refusal to comply promptly with a lawful instruction from an officer working an event detail. On paper, ordinary enough. But paper has no pulse. Paper does not show you the mother who yanked her daughter backward by the wrist when a sports car lurched forward too fast. Paper does not show you the valet who jumped sideways and dropped a ring of keys so he would not end up under a bumper. Paper does not show you the look on an officer's face when a teenager with money laughs in his face because he assumes the whole thing will be handled by Monday. That was the case. A Saturday night outside a private event venue during prom season, too many cars, too many teenagers, too many parents with phones out, the sort of scene where one moment of vanity can become one lifetime of grief. Tyler had arrived in a red coupe that was more machine than any 19-year-old needed and more status symbol than any 19-year-old should mistake for maturity. Witnesses said he rolled into the pickup circle too fast, stopped too hard, and then surged again while pedestrians were still clearing the curb. Nobody was struck. That matters. But the law does not wait for blood before it asks whether judgment has failed. By the time he reached my courtroom, the event officer, the valet, and a parent witness were all present. So was his father, though Tyler did not know that at first. The father's name mattered in the city. He sat on hospital boards, scholarship committees, and charitable councils. His name appeared on plaques where money likes to leave fingerprints. Tyler clearly knew what that name had always done for him because he entered the room as if even the fluorescent lights should have adjusted themselves before he sat down. He sat without being directed, one ankle over one knee, phone in hand, looking not nervous, not ashamed, just bored. I told him to put the phone away. Those were my first words to him. Not because I was trying to be theatrical, but because courtrooms teach in the first 10 seconds. A defendant who looks up immediately and obeys understands something. A defendant who moves slowly, as if complying is a personal favor to the institution, understands something else entirely. Tyler slid the phone into his pocket with exactly that second attitude. His lawyer shifted beside him. Good lawyers know when clients are already making the day harder than it needed to be. I asked whether he understood the charges. He said he understood that what had happened was a traffic misunderstanding inflated into a court hearing because people in public service enjoy feeling important. It was not an especially original insult, but it told me what mattered. He did not view the evening as dangerous. He viewed the response to his behavior as annoying. That distinction is the whole case in a young man like him. The officer testified first. Daniel Ruiz, 12 years on the job, calm, direct, no appetite for drama. He described the venue layout, the loading loop, the pedestrian congestion, and Tyler's car entering too quickly for conditions. He said he heard the engine surge, saw people step back, and moved immediately toward the driver's window. He identified himself and instructed Tyler to shut the engine off. Tyler reportedly replied, "Relax, officer. I'm not parking. I'm arriving." Then he revved again. Ruiz told him a second time to shut the engine off. Tyler laughed. He finally complied only after a third instruction, then asked the officer whether he understood how much the car cost. When Ruiz asked for license and registration, Tyler allegedly said, "This will disappear by Monday anyway." That sentence sat in the room like a bad smell. I asked Officer Ruiz whether he understood that as a threat. He said no. He understood it as the kind of sentence spoken by somebody who expected experience to save him. That was a strong answer. Honest, too. Threats are hot. Tyler had been cold. Cold is often more revealing. The valet came next. Miguel Alvarez, 26, working 2 jobs, one at the venue and one at a hotel. He testified that he had been crossing the loop with a set of keys when Tyler's car jumped forward hard enough that he had to hop sideways to avoid it. He did not fall, but he dropped the keys. What bothered him most, he said, was not the close call. It was that Tyler smiled afterward, as if the whole thing had been funny. I asked whether he meant a nervous smile. Miguel said no. Entertained, he said, like he thought everybody else was overreacting. Then came the parent witness, Karen Bell, 43, a nurse with no interest in being there beyond telling the truth. She testified that she was standing near the curb with her daughter when the car came in too fast. She said she pulled her daughter back without thinking, the way mothers do before thought gets a chance. I asked whether she believed impact was certain. She said no, but close enough that certainty would have been a foolish standard. That, too, was a very good answer. Law should not require catastrophe before it recognizes danger. Then we played the body camera footage. Video is tricky. It does not always answer what people imagine it answers. Angles compress. Night lighting flattens. Sound distorts tone. But sometimes footage gives you exactly what witness memory cannot: atmosphere. This footage did. You could see the car enter too hot. You could see bodies near the curb. You could hear Ruiz identify himself and instruct Tyler to shut the engine down. You could hear Tyler laugh. At one point, after being told to step out, he said, "Judge Judy's not going to care that my tires made a little noise." The gallery stirred at that line. He had turned the whole machinery of public order into a joke before he ever entered the building. When the footage ended, I asked him whether he wanted to explain that comment. He said it was a joke. I said no, it sounded like a prediction. He said with a smile that he simply did not think the city needed to turn every loud engine into a moral crisis. That was the phrase, moral crisis. To him, the issue was not that he had endangered people. The issue was that other people had insisted on caring. His lawyer rose and did exactly what good lawyers do with bad facts. He narrowed, softened, and relabeled. He called it immature driving, not malice. He reminded the court that there had been no collision, no bodily injury, no property damage. He argued that his client's conduct was foolish but not extraordinary, and that the prosecution was inviting the court to punish optics rather than conduct. It was a clean argument, and I respected its structure, but I was less interested in the rhetoric than in the young man sitting beside it. So I asked Tyler a question his lawyer very clearly wished I would not. I asked whether at any point that evening he had considered that he might hit somebody. He paused. First real pause of the hearing. Then he said, "Not seriously." That answer mattered more to me than 10 pages of legal language. It was the first honest thing he had said all morning. I asked why not. He said, "Because I know what I'm doing in a car." Young men say that all the time, usually right before life informs them that confidence and control are distant cousins, not twins. I asked him what would have happened if Miguel had moved half a second slower. He did not answer. I asked what would have happened if Karen Bell's daughter had stepped off the curb sooner. Still nothing. Then I asked whether he always spoke to workers the way he had spoken to Officer Ruiz and the valet. That question irritated him. Good. He said people in service positions often confuse procedure with authority, and that the valet had dramatized what happened. Then he made the mistake that finally emptied the room of any remaining sympathy. He said, "Everybody's acting like I committed a war crime because I'm not driving a used Honda." Silence. Not uncertain silence. Deciding silence. I leaned forward and told him the court was not interested in whether his car was expensive or cheap. I was interested in whether he had the maturity required to operate it safely around other human beings. I told him money can buy speed, leather, and engineering, but it cannot buy judgment. Then I asked him whether his father was in the room. For the first time, his face changed. Not much, but enough. Enough for me to know that underneath the performance, there was still a son in there, and sons notice fathers differently than they notice judges. From the back row, Charles Holloway stood. Gray at the temples, dark suit, no theatrics. He came forward when I asked, not hurried, not reluctant, just deliberate. He looked first at me, then at his son, and then at the rail in front of him, as if he had already decided what this moment required and only wanted to say it cleanly. I asked whether he had watched the footage. He said yes. I asked whether there was anything in it requiring explanation. He said no. Then before his son or the lawyer could shape the air again, he said, "My son drove badly, acted badly, and treated this room like a joke. I am not here to argue with facts. I am here so he understands I won't." That was when Tyler stopped looking irritated and started looking young. I appreciated the father's clarity, but I did not soften because of it. I simply turned back to Tyler and said, "Now the room is clear." Then I ruled, guilty on reckless driving in a pedestrian-heavy zone, guilty on disorderly conduct toward a responding officer. The sentence began with money because the law required money, but I knew a fine would mean almost nothing to him. A fine is punishment only when the cost disrupts something. To a young man raised around comfort, it becomes paperwork. So I imposed the fine and then moved to what mattered. 6-month license suspension, mandatory in-person defensive driving course, completed by him, not by a family office assistant or through some online shortcut. 180 hours of community service with city traffic and pedestrian safety teams at weekend events, festivals, school crossings, and high-foot traffic zones. Reflective vest, early mornings, bad weather. Standing where ordinary people stand when they are trying to keep everybody else safe from exactly the kind of impulse he had indulged. Then came contempt. Direct contempt for mocking the court and treating the hearing as an inconvenience rather than a lawful process. 7 days in county custody, effective immediately. His lawyer stood so fast his chair nearly fell backward. He asked for reconsideration, release, a pause, anything. I denied all of it. Tyler finally asked, "For what?" I told him, "For treating public safety like your private playground and this courtroom like a punchline." The bailiff stepped forward. Tyler looked around with the stunned anger of someone waiting for an invisible system to activate on his behalf. Nobody moved. His father did not move. The lawyer did not move. The room did not move. And when the cuffs clicked, his expression changed from indignation to comprehension. That was the viral part later, apparently. People said the verdict went viral because it was dramatic. No, it went viral because people rarely get to watch a privileged young man learn in real time that the room does not always bend. It went viral because millions of ordinary people recognized the face he made when he realized his father's name had stopped at the rail and the law had kept walking. But the story did not end there, and the truth is, I care much more about what happened afterward than I do about whether the clip traveled. 3 months later, the city safety coordinator sent the first detailed report. Tyler had not missed a shift. The first 2 weeks, she wrote, he was stiff, silent, clearly angry, and painfully concerned with whether anyone recognized him. Then something started changing. At a downtown fair, a delivery van rolled too far into a pedestrian buffer zone while an elderly man was still crossing. Tyler moved before the supervising officer did and grabbed the man gently by the elbow, pulling him back a step. Nothing dramatic happened. No collision, no injury. But afterward, according to the supervisor, Tyler looked shaken, really shaken, like he had finally experienced the feeling from the other side of the windshield. That is how learning usually arrives, not in speeches, in moments. In one sharp realization that the gap between almost and too late is thinner than you used to think. The next report was better. He had stopped talking about hours and started learning names. He knew which crossing guards liked coffee black, which event officers carried extra ponchos, which intersections backed up when school let out. One supervisor wrote that Tyler had become reliably useful. That may not sound like a compliment, but in my world, it is one of the highest. Reliably useful means the ego has finally lost some ground to responsibility. The first interesting thing I learned about Tyler after the hearing was not from him. It came from his father. Not a call, not pressure, not a favor, disguised as a conversation. Charles Holloway sent a 1-paragraph note through proper channels. It said only that he would not interfere with any part of the sentence, and that all requests by family staff to assist with transportation, scheduling, or supervision should be declined unless explicitly authorized by the court. That note told me 2 things. First, the father had understood exactly what I was trying to do. Second, he knew his own household well enough to realize there would be a reflexive effort to soften the edges if he did not stop it. People with means often do not even notice how quickly whole systems of convenience rise around them. Drivers solve lateness. Assistants solve paperwork. Lawyers solve conflict. By the time a child grows into adulthood inside that machinery, reality itself can start to feel optional. A sentence that allows all that machinery to remain intact is often no sentence at all. The second thing I learned came from the first day of community service. Tyler arrived early. That surprised the supervisor enough that she put it in writing. He stood next to a folding table stacked with fluorescent vests and looked visibly miserable, which did not surprise anyone. The assignment that morning was a downtown charity run with road closures, confused drivers, strollers, and a weather forecast that could not decide whether it wanted rain or heat. In other words, it was exactly the kind of public environment he had spent his life moving through as though it existed for him. Only this time, his job was the opposite. His job was to make the day function for other people. The supervisor told him where to stand, when to signal, and how to communicate with the traffic officer at the opposite corner. She later wrote that he listened carefully, not graciously, but carefully. That distinction matters. A person who has spent years being the center of arrangements often needs time to understand the value of receiving instruction from someone he would previously have overlooked. He did not thank her. He did not smile, but he listened. Again, not nothing. By the third event, he began asking questions, not argumentative questions, practical ones. What happens if the driver ignores the cone line? Why do we position volunteers farther up the block instead of at the exact crossing? Why do parents with strollers react more slowly to hand signals? These are basic operational questions, but they reveal something important. Curiosity is the first crack in entitlement. Once a person starts wanting to understand a system rather than merely expecting it to bend, there is hope for him. The traffic unit sergeant later reported a conversation that stayed with me. Tyler had been standing beside a school crossing guard one afternoon when dismissal let out. Children spilled onto the sidewalk in uneven streams, some running, some distracted, some pulling at backpacks, some breaking from their parents without warning. A car rolled too far into the painted line, not aggressively, just carelessly. The crossing guard stepped out with one hand raised and stopped the vehicle with her body before the driver fully processed what he had done. Afterward, Tyler apparently asked her how long she had been doing this. She said 18 years. Then he asked whether drivers always ignored her signals the first time. She answered, "The ones in a hurry do. They always think nothing will happen in the next 3 seconds." According to the sergeant, Tyler stood silent for the rest of the shift. Good. Silence is useful when it is finally in service of thought. Now let me be clear about something else. Community service does not magically transform every defendant. Sometimes it just creates a more irritated person in a reflective vest. That is reality. But when you choose the assignment carefully, you at least give the person a chance to confront the human meaning of what he did. I did not send Tyler to sort paper in a basement because paper would teach him nothing. I sent him where impatience, carelessness, and contempt meet actual flesh and blood vulnerability every weekend. At school crossings, in event zones, at curb cuts, in loading lanes, in all the little places where one selfish second can ruin a stranger's life. That is where his arrogance belonged if it was going to be corrected. His father came back into the story only once more, and indirectly. About 2 months into the service term, Tyler was seen getting dropped off by a driver. The supervisor noted it because the sentence had been clear. His transportation was his own responsibility. When asked, Tyler said the driver had not been sent by his father. It turned out to be a family employee acting helpfully on his own initiative. The next day, that employee was gone. Not reassigned, gone. I do not know exactly what conversation happened in the Holloway house, but I know enough about discipline to recognize its traces. Somebody in that house had finally understood that protecting Tyler from inconvenience was the very disease that produced him. The in-person defensive driving course produced another useful report. Unlike online modules, which people click through while checking messages and eating lunch, in-person instruction leaves witnesses. The instructor wrote that Tyler entered the class on day 1 with what she called fraternity confidence, and by day 3 had become painfully alert to his own blind spots. During one exercise involving stopping distances at low speeds in wet conditions, he reportedly muttered, "I never realized how little room there is." Exactly. That sentence should be stitched onto the steering wheel of every performance-minded teenage driver in the country. They all think there is room until suddenly there is not. Near the end of the 6 months, Officer Ruiz came back into my chambers on an unrelated scheduling matter, and I asked him, because I was curious, whether he had seen Tyler since the hearing. He had, twice, once at a downtown parade route and once outside a school pickup zone. I asked how he seemed. Ruiz thought for a second and said, "Less polished, more aware." Then he added something better. "He makes eye contact now." That may sound like a small thing, but it is not. Eye contact is recognition. Recognition is the beginning of responsibility. A young man who can finally look directly at the people managing public order around him may not yet be wise, but at least he is no longer moving through the world as if everyone else is a blur. Then came the final review hearing. Tyler returned to court on time. No phone in his hand, no ankle over his knee, no smirk. He looked at me directly, finally understanding that the room had been real.